Hi, welcome back to McNally's Musket Missive. I'm Harry McNally, and this is a rifle musket. Last episode we talked about the Model 1863, its changes from the Model 1861, and what it took from the Special Model 1861. Today we're going to be talking about the Model 1864, which is a minor revision to the Model 1863. So minor, in fact, that it's often called the Model 1863 Type 2. First and foremost is the return to the barrel band springs. We've still got the rounded barrel bands, but they're no longer held on by the screw tension and clamp. They're held on by the barrel band springs again. We've got a modified rear sight, which I will show you when I get this into the light box. And the design specifications call for an Enfield-style ramrod tip, but as we'll talk about, this one and most of them didn't actually have that. So I don't have a lot for this episode since the changes are so slight, so let's get into the light box and I'll show you the highlights. So, by now we've become quite familiar with the look of the Springfield rifle musket. The 1864 is much the same as the 1863, the 1861, the 1855. Anyway, moving on to the other side, same deal. Going to the lock, we see the case-hardened hammer and lock plate, barrel and bolster in the white. The rear sight seems to have turned brown with time, but that was originally blued. Moving forward, we have the return to the barrel band spring that we saw in the models 1861, 55, 42, 16, etc., but still rounded like we saw with the special model 1861 and the model 1863. Going to the middle barrel band, we see that it's still got a screw. That makes it easier to do the sling swivel. Business end, same as before. The original tulip head ramrod that we saw introduced with the Model 1855 does not have the slotted ramrod head that the spec called for. Very similar to the British Enfield style. And I've got a photograph of that here for you. This example is not in the best of shape, but you get the idea, I'm sure. Going to the other side, we see the fairly distinct inspection cartouche. RPB is Robert P. Beals, inspector at Springfield Armory, according to these notes, 1862 to 1879. We've got the VP Eagle Head proof stamps on the barrel, you can see there. Going to the top, 1864 dated barrel with the 1863 dated lock plate. This is actually one of the few muskets that I own where the barrel and lock plate dates match. You can see the checked hammer, the checked shield on the hammer. Somebody named Thomas appears to have stamped their name over the date. I have no idea what that is. If you have any idea, please let me know. And now we look at the new rear sight. As you can see, it's just got the one-piece leaf. The standard 100-yard leaf is the default, and when you flip it up, you've got the 500 notch at the top, and the hole in the notch in the center are for the 300-yard sight, which was previously its own leaf, but just for ease of production, they've made it all one piece. Here we see the leaf raised a bit, just to demonstrate that it is just one piece now. Now, before we leave the Springfield rifle musket behind forever, there is one little curiosity I would like to address. That's the rear sling swivel attachment. On every other rifled musket that Springfield made, the 55, the 61, the 63, spec called for a tapered pin filed flush with the rest of the pin. Here we see it on the 1855, the 61s I've shown you, the Colt Special Model 61. But when we got to the 1863, you'll see that it's held on with a screw. It's also held on with a screw on this Model 1864. Now, I have pored over my references, and I found no reference to this being a change that they really called for. However, in an informal survey I've taken of 63s and 64s, I found that about half of them have the screw, and the other half have the tapered pin. I've asked about this. Nobody really seems to know what I'm talking about. So my guess as to why they did this was to ease production. Instead of tapping in a pin and then cutting it off and filing it flush on both ends, they just threaded one end of the sling swivel and put in a screw. But again, as we've constantly have brought up during the course of the show, we've got all these parts on hand. Let's use these up. So my guess is that for ease of production, they started using the screw, even though the spec technically called for the taper pin. Again, I've found no references in the writing to support this one way or the other. If you've found anything, if you know of anything, please, for the love of God, let me know. This has been driving me nuts ever since I noticed it 2 or 3 years ago. So as I mentioned before, the ramrod head with the Enfield type slotted tip didn't really come into full production with the Model 1864 because they just had so many of the older ones on hand. And there's really no sense in producing something new when you've got plenty of the older stock on hand, which is perfectly serviceable, and you're in the middle of a war. In fact, there were so many ramrods on hand at one point that during the Siege of Petersburg, unit requisitioned some replacement ramrods to have in stores. Somehow extra zeros got added to the requisition. So what ended up happening was bored soldiers would come down, requisition a replacement for their ramrod, which they didn't need, load a charge of powder into the barrel, and then put their extra ramrod in there, and then they would fire it towards the enemy because they loved the sound that it made when it came twanging out the barrel. They thought it was great fun. Soldiers get very bored during a siege. By war's end, 254,340 Model 1864s were produced. It's really just a modified 1863. Like I said, it's sometimes called the 1863 Type 2. And it's not particularly noteworthy except in one regard. This is the last U.S. musket. The end of the Civil War saw an end of the muzzle-loading military weapon as far as the United States was concerned. By war's start, cartridge guns, repeating weapons, breech loaders were very common in the civilian market. In fact, the carbine used by the U.S. cavalry was a breech-loading carbine. A number of them, in fact. That's a completely different can of worms to open up. But the technology had left these arms behind, and the only reason the Civil War was fought almost entirely with muzzle loaders, as far as the infantry is concerned, was because there were just so many of them on hand, and you don't conduct a massive overhaul of arms and tactics in the middle of a war. That's just not at all a good idea. But yeah, this is the end of the muskets. Worry not, however, I've got a few more episodes planned. I've got 2 more muskets that we didn't talk about that weren't U.S. produced, which is why I didn't talk about them during the initial run. And I got a couple other surprises up my sleeve. But that's everything for this episode. Thank you very much for watching. Please like this video. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, please. And I would like to thank my Patreon supporters for their generous support of this channel. If you would like to become one of them, please consider sponsoring me in the link below. And thank you very much for watching. Have a great day. Bye.